Some commanders are extremely good even before you max them out. In fact, historically, there's always been a few commanders that you don't need to max at all to get an overwhelming majority of their punching power. So in this video, we're going to talk about the very best 5-5-5-1 commanders that's maxing the first 3 skills in Rise of Kingdoms. Let's get started. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming and today's video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms. And the main driver for this video is the fact that most people don't have the sculptures to max every commander, and newer players need a way to get a bunch of open field marches up and running as fast as they can. So if that's what you're trying to do, then what you need to do is potentially not max all the commanders that you're working on, but get the majority of their punching power for a fraction of the sculptures. In fact, the way that skill ups work in Rise of Kingdoms is they get increasingly expensive with each skill that you add on. They start with 10 sculptures to get a skill up and end with 80 sculptures to get a skill up. The last 4 skill ups are 75, 75, 80, and then 80, which is a lot. That's a total of 310 sculptures. Now, if you've been following along, or if you're newer to the game, you may not have known that it takes a grand total of 700 sculptures to max out a commander. So that 310 that comes from the last 4 skills, if you could skip those, it would only cost you 390 sculptures. That's 10 for the unlock, 380 to max the first 3 skills. So there are a number of commanders, especially historically, where this has been an amazing configuration. So in this video, I'm going to go through and talk about which of these commanders really are the very best to take to 5-5-5-1, or even 5-5-5-0, which will be the case for Sargon, weirdly enough, and we'll talk about why that is. But in order to really talk about which commanders are the best ones to take to 5-5-5-1, they also just need to be a really good investment. For example, Trajan is not only a bad investment, but also I don't actually think he's very good at 5-5-5-1 because Trajan in his active skill makes you take more damage. So if you're going to use him, you really need to get the full benefit of what he's doing in order to, in my opinion, enjoy using him. So he fails on both accounts. I think he's not actually a great commander to 5-5-5-1 because of the way his active skill works. I think you really need as much punch as possible from this guy. And secondly, I don't think he's a good invest. So let's go to my investment tier list, and then we'll modify it to talk about actually these are the best 5-5-5-1 commanders. All right, if you haven't seen this before, this is a list that I update pretty much every month, and it talks about the best open field investments in Rise of Kingdoms. This is specifically oriented towards free-to-play and low spenders that purely open field. And it talks about the top priority, low priority commanders, the ones that you would do before Season of Conquest, the ones that have very specific roles that you only should do if you know exactly what you're doing, then commanders that you shouldn't work on at all, and then ones that you should really just accumulate for free, okay? This list is designed to be extremely focused, and the top priority is intended to be very, very exclusive. The low priority is intended to be very, very exclusive, because the reality is you can't work on that many commanders at a time anyways. So a part of what you need to think about as we get into this 5-5-5-1 list is, in fact, what are you using in the open field? And how many marches of each troop type are you going to field? These days, I believe a diversity is the best thing you can do, and you really should be looking for 1 march of each troop type as fast as you can get it. That, by the way, is the third reason Trajan is a really bad choice for 5-5-5-1, because leadership is actually just a massive question mark for what that's going to be in the future. We don't even know if we're getting more open field leadership, and then making a set of talented leadership gear is an expensive but potentially an irrelevant choice depending on what the developers do. We don't know yet. So what I'm trying to say is infantry, cavalry, and archers are what we should be sticking to for open field. So let me just snap my fingers real quick and update this list so that we can rearrange things based on how good they are for being 5-5-5-1. All right, I've added in 4 rows here. And the 4 ways I think we're going to differentiate the commanders in the game is to say, hey, these are actually the best for 5551 and they're good investments. So they're platforms for future investment. You don't actually need to max them right away. The next category is going to be, hey, these are good for 5551, but you actually should just max these commanders. Boudica is an example of that. Boudica Prime is transformative with her expertise. She shrugs off debuffs, which opens up the Artemisia combo. We'll talk about that in a bit. The next thing is, hey, these are good at 5551, but they're actually just not a good investment anymore. So you probably shouldn't put sculptures in them, even though if you had them, they would be good. And then I'm going to have this bad for 5551 category, which is where the overwhelming majority of these commanders will go. And I'm not even going to bother probably with the garrison commanders and a bunch of these other ones, okay? So let's get it going. First up, we start with the top priority commanders. Are they actually good at 5551? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, Zhuge Liang, Nevsky, Skippy Prime, and Liu Che are really, really good at 5551. I will, however, say that Liu Che, I'm going to bump down over here because he actually is pretty transformative when you max him. He has a chance to do a double attack, which is crazy. So yes, he is really good, but actually I think you really need to max this commander to get the full value. Now, these other 3 commanders, we can look at their expertise skills, and I think you'll see like, yeah, I mean, you want them, but you probably don't have to go for them urgently. Let me show you. Zhuge Liang's expertise skill is going to make it so that he does more damage. Upon entering battle, this commander gains the Marquis effect, which increases your damage by 10% for 15 seconds. And each time their burning skill or their Marquis skill does damage, this troop's commander gains 30 rage, which is nice. If we look over here, here is the Marquis skill. Whenever this commander uses an active skill, their troop gains the Marquis effect, and it lasts for 10 seconds if you don't already have it. But if you do already have it and you've got only archers, then when you use your active skill, you consume that and do area of effect damage. I mean, look. Hey, look. You obviously should max Zhuge Liang. Like, all these commanders, their expertise are going to be good. Okay, but I wouldn't say that it's like transformative. Here on Nevsky, troops led by this commander deal 5% increased normal attack damage and gain a 10% chance to increase the health of your cavalry by 30% for 3 seconds. It's very good, obviously. But like, yeah, I mean, you don't have to have it to get really great value from him. And then Skippy Prime, where you at, bro? Hey, there he is. What does this do? Ooh, increases damage dealt by 10%, and when your target is silenced, rage grows 30% faster. I mean, yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Would I say it's absolutely transformative that you have to have it? Probably not, right? Not immediately. So when we jump back to this list, it is actually really obvious why these commanders were my top priority recommendations. That's for sure. But if we continue on with other commanders that are also good at 5551, we need to now look at the low priority commanders. There's actually some pretty darn good ones in here. First of all, let's start with Joan Prime. Joan Prime is an amazing example of an ideal commander, and you only even need to max the first skill and the last skill. Ideally, just 5115. Her expertise skill does a very small boost in damage. Honestly, it's a very small boost in damage. And in addition, her fourth skill makes it so that your active skill fires again an extra time once every other skill cycle. So as long as you max the first skill, you could also max the second skill. I think that will be my preference. And then all of this is really going for the fourth skill being maxed. Joan Prime is an absolute beast, and you actually, with her, can just stop putting sculptures into her, which is kind of weird. I mean, like, I'm even inclined to, like, move these commanders just down to here to say, like, these are actually the best 5551 commanders, but, like, you really should continue with all of them, like, all of them. You really should max all of those. But Joan is a commander that like, if you didn't max her, I'd be like, yeah, okay. I get it. I definitely get it. So this brings us to Huo. And Huo is a new guy on the block, and he's also pretty darn good at 5551. Some people don't go for the expertise skill on him because this commander is just weird. So with the expertise skill, when you defeat a march, it resets your rage. but it also resets one of his other skills that makes it so that you have less rage requirement for your active skill. It's really, really powerful, but some people actually skip expertising him specifically to avoid that reset of your rage. Now, I personally think just going for the expertise is the stronger play, but for 5551, yeah, I think he actually will be really awesome, and there is a situation where you wouldn't max him. So I'm going to put him there. From here, I actually want to talk about Sargon. Sargon is a great example, and instead of unlocking the last skill, you actually should go 5550. Weirdly enough, I did a ton of testing with Sargon, and he actually gets worse when you unlock the last skill. Only when you get the last skill to 4 skill points do you actually get a better result than when you just unlock the last skill. It's so weird. This has to do with the fact that Sargon will remove his debuff from his enemy and do damage to them, and that comes from the last skill, but you might just rather have the debuff stay on the target. So at a very low amount of skill damage dealt from that last skill, you'd rather just have the debuff stay, so and not even remove it at all. So by not unlocking the last skill on Sargon, weirdly enough, he just does more damage. So he's actually a good candidate for 5550. The only thing that's a little weird about him is that now that smite damage is here, I do kind of wonder, like, how long is his skill damage sort of taken debuff going to be a thing that we really care about? I don't know. This brings us to Boudica Prime, by the way, who is a great commander to max. She actually, in my estimation, is transformative. She shrugs off debuffs. There's an 80% chance that she says, oh, you're trying to silence me? Yeah, I don't care. Oh, I'm trying to silence myself? That's an Artemisia thing? Yeah, I don't care. She's really great for that. And I think if you're going to go for her, you really do want to go for the expertise on her. So this brings us to the commanders that are in the niche role. And are they good at 5551? And I'm going to say that Guan Yu, now that we've seen the new infantry, is still a pretty good invest and is really great at 5155. So his second skill is a garrison hitting related skill. In your perfect world, you would actually skip that skill, but the odds that you're able to do that with your skill deployment is pretty low. His expertise skill does very little. It makes it so that after you get a shield, you do a little bit more skill damage. You also run faster when you leave a resource node. It's cool and all, but he's one of those commanders you don't have to max to get a ton of value. And I'll also say that another commander that goes on that list is William. But, man, should you start working on William now is such a weird question. I am not sure. I feel like he's really great, but let's just talk about this in-game real quick. The reason that William has historically been an amazing 5551 commander is that you basically get almost his entire kit, including his 4th skill, which makes it so that when you land his area of effect damage, which is a narrow rectangle, but should happen if you're in the right fights, it's going to increase your defense by 10% and the defense of 4 other nearby allied troops by 10% for 3 seconds, and you get 50 rage per second. So the only difference that you're getting for 310 legendary commander sculptures into this skill is 10% defense on each of those marches. You also get the expertise, which does enhance your instant proc damage. But people look at him and they're like, hey, I can get a lot of his punch here for just 3 skills. Now, the reason that I'm thinking, I mean, look, if you have him, he's very good right now. William is meta. Like, if you're making 2 cavalry marches, William is one of the 4 commanders that you use. I'm using him, okay? I just want to be really clear. But like, look, he's got 1500 damage factor, okay? In a world where we're getting commanders that are doing 2,700 damage factor, okay? And I get that he does AoE versus single target, right? But like, that's 1,200 damage factor less. So I feel like he's starting to be really outclassed. So if you have him, William is really amazing. But do you want to start investing in him right now, or a month from now, or 3 months from now? I'm not so sure about that, especially when we talk about, you know, look, if you're putting a 5551 configuration onto a commander, I think it's because you're urgently trying to get a lot of marches up and running. And I really don't want to encourage you to invest in what I sort of call the fourth commander of a troop type. Let me explain. If you're using 2 marches of each troop type, okay, maybe you get up to 6 marches in KVK, maybe you only even use 1 march of a troop type. But if you're using 2 marches of a troop type, it's not a great idea to go invest sculptures in the 4th best commander, the one that's most likely to get carved off when something better shows up. So William is really good. Like, I'm telling you, I'm using him in the field right now. But also, he's the first Cav commander I'm going to cut, probably, when new Cav commanders come into the game, or even if they add a leadership commander that works with cavalry, like how we got Honda Tadakatsu at one point. We don't know what that's going to look like, but I just feel uncomfortable wholeheartedly saying, start investing in him today, which is very different than how I felt about him a year or 2 ago. So we make our way back to this list, and there's actually a couple archers that are really, really, I think, important to talk about. The first I want to talk about is Nebu. And Nebu's pretty damn good. He hits 5 targets. He does 1,500 damage factor. It's pretty cool, okay? Love to see it. And he is just historically been so good at 5-5-1-1. And in this case, it's, 5-5-1-5. The third skill is related to rallying. That's what you try to go for, skip the third skill. But I think that he's not an amazing investment anymore. I mean, look, Zhuge Liang hits 5 targets in a circle, and he does 2,000 damage factor, and he does a massive debuff. Like, Nebu is so good if you have him. If you don't, I'm not sure he's a great investment anymore. I will say, on the flip side of things, an archer that's pretty good, and I think he's a pretty okay investment, is Henry. But Henry also, I'm also almost inclined to put him down here. So Henry does really good single target damage, and I don't think you need to have him maxed to really enjoy him. One of his skills is related to hitting garrisons, which is a bit of a bummer. And he does 2,300 damage factor. I think he is definitely the most relevant of any of the commanders I've put in there. But also, sometime in the not too distant future, depending on how many archer marches you're running, you'd look to replace him with whatever sort of the new hotness is. So I'm going to move him over there. I'm going to say probably not a great invest right now. Similarly, XY, this dude was a beast. And you didn't even need to max 3 of the skills. 2 of the skills was pretty much good enough. The third skill is related to hitting garrisons. I'm going to say it's just not a great investment anymore, even though if you have him at that skill configuration, you certainly would be using him. Similarly, Artemisia. Man, so good when paired with Boudica. You get the overwhelming majority of her kit at 5-5-1-1. If you did max that 4th skill, it does get better. The 3rd skill is related to garrisons. Artemisia was the great pair with Boudica Prime. And the reason is that Artemisia silences herself, but increases her damage dealt by 50%. Obviously, Boudica Prime shrugs that off 80% of the time. So that's really good as a combination. I use that right now. I just don't think that Artemisia is a great invest right now. I wouldn't start putting sculptures into her. And yeah, I wouldn't start putting sculptures into her. And her expertise is in some ways bad, by the way. She has a very small damage over time effect, but increases the skill damage dealt of your enemy. It's just a real head scratcher. Now, this really brings me to the bad for 5-5-5-1 category, where I really want to just focus for a moment on putting just a bunch of commanders that I wouldn't do anymore, okay? That includes Trajan, Tommy, Honda, Artemisia, Bert, do I even need to put Charlemagne? Like, all these commanders that are in the just no category would go in here. And, gosh, Saladin. I almost need a before SOC category. If I had a before Season of Conquest, Saladin used to be so goated at 5-5-5-1. I'm going to put him up here in the not a good invest anymore category. Because, it was so good at 5-5-5-1. He get almost everything he's doing, except he has a city hitting skill on the 4th skill. He was so good. Other commanders that are just bad for 5-5-1. I mean, dude, Harold is the worst. He gets worse for sure without being expertise. You really want to max him. All these other commanders, this is a garrison. Hannibal Barca, no. I will put Leonidas up here as not a good invest anymore. Leo used to be a beast just maxing the first 2 skills, and he just doesn't quite cut it anymore. It's conceivable they could do something with a museum buff where it's like, oh, all of a sudden we talk about, but probably it's not going to happen, okay? Edward of Woodstock is a no-go here. Khan is a no-go. Gilga's kind of an interesting one, but I'm just going to say probably not a great choice for a 5/5, 5/1. Not anymore, especially, look, his health debuff was so good originally, but now we got Skippy Prime doing an area of effect thing. Oh my god, Moctezuma is just terrible. I don't know how Martel got into the just no category. He should be in the free category. Suleiman, Lubu, Theo, and, oh yeah, Ramses. I mean, I think, like, he once upon a time was actually pretty good for 5/5/5/1. He actually was one of those commanders that, like, he was good, but like, you wouldn't do this anymore. And then Wu Zetian, bro, nah. If we want to look at the free commanders, I think there are a few good ones here that, like, you should just work on them for free. You know what? I'm just going to put him up in this not a good invest anymore category. I mean, like, he's a gold key commander. Like, I don't think you should put a bunch of sculptures into him. I think you could put a few into him, and it'd be pretty good. I'll move him to the left, kind of signify, yeah, I think he's kind of better than some of these other ones. Similarly, gosh, like, E-Song, it's kind of weird. I think he's great to max. I'm going to put him here, but you need to understand that, like, you really can't stop at 5/5/5/1 with E-Song. Like, you go to max him, you do it only if you're coming from the early game. He does this area of effect damage when you expertise him. You really need to expertise him. But, like, sure, use him before he's expertised, right? Like, he is good for that. Similarly, Minamoto is the same way. Like, both of these guys are way better when you max them. Minamoto does way more damage. Also, the 4th skill does an amazing debuff. I believe it's called Warlord. 10% chance to make the target take 30% more damage for 3 seconds. And all things hitting that target benefit? Bro. Yeah, that's really good. Okay. Other commanders that are in here, Alexander the Great goes in this category of once was so good and now is just kind of not a good investment. Richard the First, dude, he was so great for this. Yeah, the expertise is really good for open field fighting, but, like, you know, I don't think you need to do that. It's not a great investment anymore. Constantine was, like, so good for Canyon, but only Canyon, and it's, like, really not a good investment anymore. I don't even want to look at, like, Attila and Takeda. You should probably max these guys. I don't know, Bobber and Margaret, bro, I don't even want to look at that. Chandragupta is one of the ones you really kind of need to max. The rest of these are just garrison commanders, so, you know, no good. Pakal also, bro, don't mess around. Dido. Yeah, I'm going to put Tariq ibn Ziyad as, like, hey, maybe not a great investment, but for a time you could have made an argument that he was pretty damn good at 5/5/5/1. One of his skills is relating to hitting garrisons. I think it's the 3rd skill, so you'd have to kind of skip that. Gathering commanders all kind of go up there, no problem. Easy to decide that. Mulan, you really want to be maxed because she extends her buff duration by a second. It's amazing. Caesar and Ethel, I mean, I think you want to max them, man. I don't know if they're exactly bad. Ragnar, certainly. Worse Caesar. El Cid is actually, like, kind of fine. Freddy's not amazing. These 3, like Thutmose, Martel, and Pyrrhus, actually are probably pretty good in the grand scheme of things, but I don't think you're trying to use them at that skill configuration. Maybe in the early game, specifically Pyrrhus and Thutmose you would be, and they would actually be very good in that context. So on the one hand, I'm tempted to have a before Season of Conquest section, but on the other, I just don't think you should be investing in most commanders that until you get to Season of Conquest. You just gotta hoard it up, baby. Now we gotta look at Justinian and Gorgo. I'm gonna move Gorgo into the bad for 5/5/5/1 category because she's not an open field commander. She actually could be pretty good, surprisingly, but I will be willing to adjust that once we actually get to test with her. And that only leaves us with Justinian, who's really just a rally commander. Like, a lot of what he does is rally specific. So all those commanders go to the bad for 5/5/5/1 category. So what actually bubbles up to the top? The great commanders that you would still consider investing in today, be pretty confident in those investments for now, and feel comfortable with what you're doing, is Joan Prime, Huo, Sargon, and Guan. But those aren't actually the highest priority. And I will say, like, Guan is... I'm a little worried about him, but, like, given that we just got Liu Che, it's probably going to be another year before we see new infantry that would for sure replace Guan, and that silence is so good. I feel pretty comfortable with that configuration as being a pretty good investment, and some of the best commanders to just leave at 5-5, 5-1. Now, weirdly enough, these other commanders that you should just max are just actually better overall commanders. Skippy Prime, Nevsky, Zhuge Liang, Liu Che. Actually just better commanders than the category above it, but you actually should go max them as well. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. They're the tier below, but only because it's like, hey, you should just max them, right? Same story with Boudica Prime. I think it really is transformative when you expertise her. So if you're going to work on her, you should ultimately have the long-term goal of saying, yeah, I'm going to max her out. And then from there, we've got these two, okay? Isong and Minamoto, which, yes, you should max them. And yes, they are good. But those two you should also only work on before you get to Season of Conquest, if that's a project you're going to embark on. Minamoto, I mean, if you're going to max him right away for maximum value over time. And then Isong, I feel like he gets very outclassed later on, but he's still so good that he holds up to some of these other commanders, right? So you could use Boudica with Isong until you get Zhuge Liang up and running, and then Zhuge Liang with Boudica is really good. And even then, you'd probably be looking to run a second Archer March. So where does that leave you? So I don't think these commanders are a great investment anymore, but if you had them, you'd certainly use them. And when I say they're not a great investment, I mean, I think Henry could be. But I'm also, I don't know. I worry about the damage factor on, like, Nebu and William. I think XY's fine, but Artemisia, I mean, like, she does 1,800 damage factor, and new commanders are doing 2,700 damage factor. So, like, I don't think that pattern's gonna change. That's what I'm trying to say. That's my read on that one. Even, you know, look, Liu Che's doing area of effect damage, 2,250 with a huge slow effect, right? Whereas Artemisia, again, 1,800 damage factor. That's a lot of damage factor less. So I think this is where I land, okay? And I'm being really aggressive with these commanders in the front that I think are not a great invest anymore, and I'm less aggressive about the ones in the back. Those ones in the back are actually just like, why are you putting sculptures there? The ones in the front, like, there are people that can justify it if they know what they're doing, okay? And one last piece of guidance I'll give you is that generally I think it's a good idea to be hoarding up sculptures. So rather than say, like, oh, I got 300 sculptures, let me go take a commander to 5-5-5-1, you might be better to just say, hey, I'm going to wait for a new commander to drop in the next cycle, and I'm going to have more sculptures for that, and I'm going to max that one right away. I think that's a better play than, like, looking to spend your sculptures immediately on something that is in this category of maybe not being the best long-term investment, all right? If you found the video helpful, do me a favor, throw a like on here and consider subscribing. I make very thoughtful and detailed guides on which commanders are great to invest in, and I know because I've used the overwhelming majority of these commanders personally, and I spend way too much time talking about them and thinking about them. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you want that full explanation of which commanders are a good commander to invest in and why, I'll have a card in the end screen for that in just a second. Alternatively, if you want to see when I did a 5-5-1-1 version of this list, card will be in the end screen for that in just a second as well.